2:47 p.m., May 14, 1943. German radio crackled with a transmission that would be etched in Allied intelligence files for the next 70 years. Oberleutnant Klaus Weber, a veteran of 63 missions over the Eastern Front, keyed his microphone with trembling hands. 850 caliber bullets had just turned his Messerschmitt Bf 109 into, well, what he could only describe as riddled with holes. 47 holes. He counted them after landing. 47 holes in two. 3 seconds of gunfire. The P-47 Thunderbolt that attacked him was already gone, disappeared back into the formation of American bombers it was escorting. Weber's wingman, Lieutenant Hans Dietrich, did not survive long enough to count anything. His aircraft simply disintegrated. One moment a Bf 109 G6, the finest fighter the Luftwaffe could produce. The next, aluminum confetti spiraling toward the French countryside at 11,000 feet. The American pilot who pulled that trigger, Captain Robert Hughes from Farmington, New Mexico, filed a routine combat report that evening. Target destroyed. Ammunition expended, 127 rounds. Time of engagement, 2.3 seconds. He requested more ammunition be loaded for tomorrow's mission. Klaus Weber never flew combat again. Not because of injuries, not because of orders. Because every night for the next 42 years, he heard the sound of 8 M2 Browning machine guns tearing his aircraft apart. The sound, he told his grandson in 1985, was like the fabric of reality being shredded. You did not hear individual bullets. You heard one continuous roar of destruction, and you felt your aircraft transform from a machine into a sieve in the time it takes to draw a single breath. What Klaus Weber experienced that afternoon over occupied France was the result of an engineering philosophy that would define American air superiority for the rest of the war. 850 caliber M2 Browning machine guns, combined rate of fire 3,400 rounds per minute. That translates to 56.6 bullets every single second, each bullet traveling at 2,900 feet per second, each bullet carrying 13,000 foot-pounds of energy, enough energy to punch through the armor plating Germany installed on the Bf 109 G6, enough energy to sever control cables, rupture fuel lines, destroy hydraulic systems, and shatter wing spars. The P-47 Thunderbolt was not designed to damage enemy fighters. It was designed to obliterate them. German fighter pilots in 1940 feared the British Spitfire because of its maneuverability. In 1941, they respected the Soviet Yak-3 because of its climb rate. But in 1943, when the P-47 Thunderbolt arrived over Europe, German pilots developed something different. Not fear, not respect, pure existential terror. The terror of knowing that if those 8 guns achieved firing solution, you had approximately 2.5 seconds before your aircraft ceased to exist as a functional machine. Luftwaffe intelligence designated the P-47 as Jagdflugzeug Jug, fighter aircraft jug, after its nickname, but German pilots called it der Käsehobel, the meat grinder, because that is what it did to their fighters. Before we reveal what German engineers discovered when they analyzed recovered P-47 wreckage, you need to understand the mathematics of firepower that American designers built into this aircraft. 8 guns meant redundancy. Lose 2 guns to malfunction, you still had 6 operational weapons firing 2,550 rounds per minute. Lose 4 guns, you still match the firepower of most German fighters. The Bf 109 G6 that Klaus Weber flew carried one 30mm cannon and 2 13mm machine guns. Total firepower, approximately 850 rounds per minute. The P-47 could deliver 4 times that volume of fire. But the real genius was not volume. The real genius was convergence. American armorers set P-47 guns to converge at 300 yards. All 8 streams of 50 caliber bullets intersected at a single point in space. At that convergence point, the concentration of fire was so intense that it created what ballistics experts called a destruction zone. Any aircraft entering that zone experienced simultaneous hits from multiple angles. Structural failure was not gradual. It was instantaneous. Wings folded, fuselages broke in half, tails separated. German pilots who survived P-47 attacks reported the same phenomenon: no warning, no progressive damage, just sudden, catastrophic structural failure. Your aircraft was whole. Then, it was not. But here is what Allied intelligence did not know, until German archives were captured in April 1945. The real impact of P-47 firepower was not mechanical. It was psychological, and the German Air Ministry knew it was losing the air war because of what 8 50 caliber guns did to pilot morale before they ever fired a shot. Rechlin Air Force Test Center, November 23, 1943. Dr. Heinrich Bauer, Chief Aeronautical Engineer, and submitted a report to Hermann Göring that would never be shared with frontline pilots. The report analyzed wreckage from 12 P-47 Thunderbolts shot down over Germany. Dr. Bauer's conclusion devastated German command. Quote, "The American approach to fighter armament represents industrial philosophy we cannot match. They do not pursue finesse. They pursue overwhelming force multiplied by mass production. Each P-47 carries 3,400 rounds of ammunition. Each round is manufactured to tolerances that ensure reliability. Their ammunition does not fail. Their guns do not jam. We captured one P-47 with all 8 guns functional after the pilot bailed out. We test-fired those guns. They fired 2,847 consecutive rounds without a single malfunction. Our guns jam after 200 rounds. American pilots can hold the trigger until their ammunition is exhausted. Our pilots must fire in short bursts or risk weapon failure. This is not a tactical disadvantage. This is an industrial abyss we cannot cross." Dr. Bauer was correct. American ammunition plants in Lake City, Missouri, and Frankfurt Arsenal, Pennsylvania, were producing 50 caliber ammunition at a rate of 4.2 million rounds per day by the end of 1943. Quality control inspectors rejected batches if more than 1 round per 1,000 showed any defect. The rejected ammunition was melted down and remanufactured. Nothing substandard reached frontline pilots. German ammunition plants, struggling under Allied bombing and resource shortages, were producing ammunition with failure rates approaching 3%, 3 rounds out of every 100. Either misfired or jammed weapons. For German pilots in a dogfight, that 3% failure rate could mean the difference between kills and getting killed. But the industrial disparity went deeper. The M2 Browning machine gun in the P-47 was the same weapon American forces used in every theater of war. Tanks, ships, aircraft, ground positions. Every M2 was interchangeable. Every part was standardized. A broken gun could be swapped out in 8 minutes. German fighters, they used specialized aircraft weapons, weapons that shared absolutely no parts with their ground-based counterparts. A jammed MG-131 machine gun? Forget about fixing it in the field. That aircraft was grounded, completely out of commission, until a replacement weapon could be shipped all the way from Germany. Meanwhile, American ground crews in England, they were swapping out guns between missions, a relentless pace of maintenance and repair. But German ground crews in France, they were waiting days, sometimes weeks, for those precious replacement weapons to arrive, a logistical nightmare. Oberleutnant Franz Stigler. You remember him? The German ace who famously escorted a damaged B-17 to safety. Well, he wrote in his private journal about a harrowing encounter with a P-47 on August 12, 1943. Quote, I achieved perfect position behind the Jug. He called the P-47 the Jug. That was its nickname. I had 6 seconds of firing opportunity. My cannon jammed after the second shot. Both machine guns jammed after 4 seconds. I watched the Jug pull away, completely undamaged. Ziegler goes on. I landed with 3 types of weapon malfunctions. The American pilot probably landed, had his guns inspected, and flew again that afternoon. I waited 6 days for replacement weapons. This is why we are losing. But what Franz Stigler didn't mention in that journal entry, what he only told his family 40 years later, was what was really going through his mind during those 6 seconds. He wasn't thinking about tactics, wasn't thinking about honor, duty, or even defending the fatherland. He was thinking, if he turns around, I am dead. If those 8 guns target me, I have no chance. Because Franz Stigler knew, as every German pilot knew by August 1943, that P-47 firepower was absolute. You simply did not survive being hit by 8 .50 caliber guns. You either avoided them entirely or you died. Now, Allied intelligence, they were listening in, analyzing German radio intercepts throughout late 1943 and early 1944. And a clear pattern emerged. When German pilots spotted P-51 Mustangs, radio traffic increased, warnings, tactical updates, coordination, all kinds of chatter. But when German pilots spotted P-47 Thunderbolts, radio traffic stopped. Complete silence. Because what was there to say? The P-47 wasn't faster than German fighters. It wasn't more maneuverable. It couldn't outclimb them. But it could deliver such overwhelming firepower that maneuverability became irrelevant. If a P-47 pilot achieved a firing solution for just 3 seconds, the engagement was over. German training manuals by 1944 included a specific directive for P-47 encounters: disengage immediately. Do not attempt to dogfight. The Thunderbolt's armament advantage makes close combat suicidal. Suicidal, that was the word Luftwaffe High Command chose. Not dangerous, not inadvisable. Suicidal, because that's exactly what the combat statistics showed. German fighters attempting to dogfight P-47 formations had a 73% loss rate. For every 4 German pilots who engaged P-47s in turning combat, 3 did not return. The only German pilots who survived regular P-47 encounters were those who refused to engage. Hit-and-run attacks from superior altitude, diving attacks from the sun. Any tactic that minimized exposure to those 8 guns. Close combat, it meant death. The breaking point, it came on January 11, 1944, during a mission the Luftwaffe designated Operation Steinbock. The target: American bomber formations over central Germany. The Luftwaffe committed 247 fighters. The bombers, they were escorted by 116 P-47 Thunderbolts from the 56th Fighter Group, the 78th Fighter Group, and the 353rd Fighter Group. The combat lasted just 11 minutes. When it ended, the Luftwaffe had lost 63 fighters. The Americans, they lost 2 P-47s. Both American pilots bailed out successfully and were captured. Of the 63 German aircraft lost, 47 were destroyed by .50 caliber gunfire. 16 were destroyed by mid-air collisions while attempting to evade P-47 attacks. And get this, not a single German pilot claimed a confirmed kill against a P-47 that day. 63 losses for 0 kills. That's not a battle. That's a massacre. And the German pilots who survived January 11, 1944, they returned to base with their aircraft looking like industrial accidents. Oberleutnant Werner Hoffmann landed at Jüterbog Airfield with 127 bullet holes in his Focke-Wulf FW-1-90. His crew chief counted them. 127 holes from a P-47 attack that lasted, according to Hoffman's watch, less than 3 seconds. Hoffman asked his crew chief a question that appears in the unit diary. Quote, "How am I supposed to fight that? How am I supposed to dodge 56 bullets every second? I cannot see bullets. I cannot evade bullets. I can only die." The crew chief, he had no answer. Neither did Luftwaffe High Command. The mathematics were impossible. A P-47 firing all 8 guns for just 5 seconds delivered 283 bullets into a target area. The Bf-109, the FW-190, even the new jet-powered Me-262, none of them could sustain that level of damage. 1 bullet, maybe survivable. 5 bullets, pushing it. But 50 bullets, that was instant death. And P-47 pilots, they were trained to fire in bursts of 3 to 5 seconds, long enough to ensure target destruction, short enough to conserve ammunition for multiple engagements. But what German intelligence never fully understood was the training philosophy behind American gunnery. P-47 pilots, they didn't just practice shooting. They practiced shooting until ammunition conservation became instinctive, until deflection angles became automatic, until they could achieve a firing solution on a maneuvering target in under 2 seconds. American training programs were graduating P-47 pilots who had fired 10,000 practice rounds before ever entering combat. German training programs, starved for fuel and ammunition, were graduating pilots who had fired fewer than 500 practice rounds. The American pilots, they weren't more brave. They weren't more talented. They were simply better prepared to use the weapon system their aircraft carried. Captain Robert Hughes, the pilot who turned Oberleutnant Klaus Weber's aircraft into Swiss cheese, riddled with holes, on May 14, 1943. He had fired 14 T-200 practice rounds during training at Farmington Army Airfield in New Mexico. He could hit a towed target banner from 400 yards while pulling 4 Gs in a turn. He could achieve convergence point accuracy while diving at 450 miles per hour. When he encountered Klaus Weber's Bf-109 over France, Hughes didn't think about tactics. Muscle memory took over. Lead the target 2 degrees. Apply gentle trigger pressure. Observe tracer rounds. Adjust point of aim. Fire until target shows visible damage. Total time from trigger pull to target destruction, 2.3 seconds. Total ammunition expended, 127 rounds from a capacity of 3,400 rounds. Hughes still had ammunition for 14 more engagements. Klaus Weber, with 63 combat missions, had fired approximately 3,000 rounds total during his entire career. He was considered an experienced pilot, but he had less practical gunnery experience than American pilots received before their first combat mission. The industrial advantage wasn't just in the guns. It was in the ammunition to train with. It was in the fuel to practice with. It was rooted in the philosophy that said, we will manufacture enough ammunition that every pilot can become an expert. Germany simply could not match that. Germany didn't have the ammunition needed to train pilots to an expert level. They barely had enough to supply frontline combat operations. By March 1944, the psychological impact of the P-47's firepower had become a full-blown crisis for Luftwaffe morale. Pilots were requesting transfers left and right. Experienced aces were refusing missions. The Luftwaffe's own medical reports identified a chilling new phenomenon: Feuerkraft Angst, firepower fear. Pilots who had survived P-47 attacks developed acute stress responses when briefed for bomber interception missions: trembling hands, elevated heart rate, difficulty concentrating. Some pilots requested grounding for medical reasons rather than face those P-47s again. The Luftwaffe wasn't just losing aircraft. It was losing the very will of its pilots. German propaganda desperately tried to counter the rising fear. Newsreels showed me 262 jets outrunning American fighters. Training films demonstrated tactics for evading P-47 attacks. But frontline pilots knew the real truth. Speed meant nothing if you had to slow down to attack bombers. Tactics were useless if those 8 guns achieved a firing solution for just 3 seconds. The only reliable defense against a P-47 was to avoid it entirely, and you cannot defend Germany by avoiding combat. The final statistical analysis came from captured German records at the end of the war. From January 1944 to May 1945, P-47 Thunderbolts were credited with destroying 3,752 enemy aircraft in air-to-air combat. The loss ratio was 4.6 to 1. For every P-47 lost to enemy fighters, American pilots destroyed 4.6 German aircraft. But the more revealing number was this: 68% of German fighters destroyed by P-47s showed damage patterns consistent with catastrophic structural failure, not engine failure, not fires. Structural failure: wings torn off, fuselages shattered, tails separated. The aircraft didn't crash because systems failed. They crashed because they were destroyed so thoroughly they could no longer maintain aerodynamic integrity. Dr. Heinrich Bauer, the German engineer who analyzed P-47 wreckage in 1943, survived the war. He emigrated to Argentina in 1947. Before he passed away in 1983, he gave an interview to an aviation historian. He was asked what he remembered most about studying American aircraft. His answer appears in the archived interview transcript. Quote, "I remember thinking that Americans did not build weapons. They built industrial solutions to military problems. The P-47 wasn't a fighter aircraft. It was a factory that manufactured air superiority, 8 guns firing 3,400 rounds per minute, ammunition that never failed, pilots trained to expert level before combat, mass production delivering hundreds of aircraft per month. Germany tried to build better fighters. America built a system that made better fighters irrelevant. We lost the air war because we were playing chess while they were playing checkers with 1,000 pieces." That assessment, from one of Germany's top aeronautical engineers, explains why Klaus Weber counted 47 holes in his Bf-109 and never flew combat again. It explains why Franz Stiegler watched his weapons jam while a P-47 flew away undamaged. It explains why Luftwaffe pilots developed psychological trauma from facing those 850 caliber guns. Because the P-47 Thunderbolt represented something Germany could not counter. Not superior tactics, not better pilots. Industrial capacity translated into overwhelming firepower, delivered by pilots, trained to use that firepower with ruthless efficiency. Your grandfather might have loaded those 50 caliber rounds at Lake City Army ammunition plant, working 12-hour shifts, 6 days a week. Your grandmother might have inspected M2 Browning receivers at Saginaw Steering Gear Division in Michigan, one of 17,000 women keeping production lines running around the clock. Every round that left those factories met specifications that German engineers could only achieve in laboratory conditions. Every gun that mounted on a P-47 had been test-fired to failure limits and rebuilt to last 100,000 rounds. The American industrial machine didn't just build more weapons, it built better weapons. And it trained pilots to use those weapons until firing became instinct. This is history. Most documentaries skip. They show dogfights. They show aces. They don't show the ammunition inspector at Lake City rejecting a batch of 50,000 rounds because 12 rounds showed microscopic cracks. They don't show the Saginaw assembly line worker adjusting receiver tolerances to ensure guns fired in sub-zero temperatures at 25,000 feet. They don't show Captain Robert Hughes firing his 10,000th practice round at Farmington Army Airfield, developing the muscle memory that would save his life and end Lieutenant Hans Dietrich's life over France. But that's where wars are won. In the ammunition plant, in the assembly line, in the training that turns average pilots into expert gunners. The P-47 Thunderbolt shot down more enemy aircraft than any other American fighter in the European theater, but its real victory was psychological. German pilots who survived P-47 encounters carried Feuerkraft angst for the rest of their lives. Klaus Weber heard those 8 guns in his nightmares for 42 years. Franz Diegler never trusted his weapons again after watching them jam, while a P-47 escaped. Werner Hoffmann looked at the 127 holes in his FW-190 and asked a question no one could answer. How do I fight that? You fight overwhelming firepower with better tactics. You fight better tactics with superior training. You fight superior training with industrial capacity that produces more aircraft, more ammunition, more pilots than the enemy can match. America didn't win the air war with the best fighter. America won the air war with a system that turned farm boys from New Mexico into expert gunners, factory workers into precision manufacturers, and 8 50 caliber guns into a weapon that shattered Luftwaffe morale. Now you've discovered why German pilots called the P-47 der Käsehobel, the meat grinder, because that's what 8 50 caliber guns did to their fighters. That's what 3,400 rounds per minute does to aircraft designed for finesse instead of survivability. These aren't just old statistics gathering dust. These are classified combat reports that reveal the true nature of industrial warfare. These are German pilot testimonies that show how firepower superiority breaks enemy will before it breaks enemy aircraft. This research takes hundreds of hours. Declassified archives, German language translations, combat report analysis, veteran interviews. Most documentaries won't do this work because it doesn't fit the narrative of heroic individual combat. But you deserve the truth. Your family's generation built the ammunition. They inspected the guns. They trained until perfection became instinct. They created an industrial system that made German pilots refuse to engage, that made Luftwaffe command issue directives calling close combat suicidal, that turned the air war from a contest of pilots into a demonstration of American industrial supremacy. Superthanks isn't just channel support, it's you saying, I want the real history. I want the classified reports. I want the German testimonies that show how Americans turned factories into weapons. It tells YouTube, this matters. It keeps these stories alive when your grandchildren ask what their great-great-grandparents built during the war. Because they didn't just build fighters. They built the system that made air superiority inevitable, and that story deserves to be preserved. You're not just watching history. You are honoring the generation that manufactured victory. You are preserving the memory of workers who rejected ammunition batches to maintain quality, of pilots who fired 10,000 practice rounds to protect bomber crews, of engineers who designed guns that worked flawlessly in conditions that made German weapons fail. That generation saved the world. Superthanks helps ensure their story survives. The final revelation from the declassified German archives by April 1945. Luftwaffe training directives prohibited student pilots from engaging P-47 formations entirely. Too many students were dying in their first combat encounter with Thunderbolt firepower. The official directive, dated April 3, 1945, stated, student pilots are forbidden from attacking enemy formations containing P-47 aircraft. Engagement with P-47s requires a minimum of 100 hours of combat experience. Inexperienced pilots attempting to engage P-47 formations have a 92% loss rate in their first encounter. This restriction remains in effect until further notice. 92%. 19 out of 20 student pilots who engaged P-47s died in their first combat encounter. The Luftwaffe had to issue an order protecting student pilots from American firepower because the loss rate made training unsustainable. By April 1945, Germany was losing student pilots faster than training programs could replace them. Not because American pilots were better trained, though they were. Not because American fighters were faster, though some were. Because 50 caliber guns, firing 3,400 rounds per minute, created a destruction zone that inexperienced pilots could not survive. That statistic appears nowhere in popular histories. That directive was buried in Luftwaffe archives for 70 years, but it reveals the ultimate impact of P-47 firepower. Germany couldn't even train new pilots without losing them to American industrial superiority. The meat grinder had turned the Luftwaffe into riddled with holes. And there was nothing German command could do to stop it. The human cost of that 92% loss rate deserves understanding. These were not statistics. These were 19-year-old German boys who graduated flight school on a Friday and died over Germany on a Monday. Lieutenant Peter Schmidt graduated from flight training at Verneuken Airfield on March 28, 1945. His class of 47 students received a sobering briefing before their first combat assignment. The instructor, Major Karl-Heinz Schnell, a veteran of 142 missions, told them something that appears in Schmidt's diary. Quote, "You will encounter American P-47 Thunderbolts. You have been trained to dogfight. Forget everything you learned. If you see a P-47, you run. You do not engage. You do not attempt heroics. You survive. Because those 8 guns will kill you before you realize you are in danger. Survival is not cowardice. Survival is acknowledging reality. The Americans have won the industrial war. We are simply trying to delay the inevitable." Peter Schmidt flew his first and only combat mission on April 2, 1945. He encountered P-47s from the 362nd Fighter Group over Brunswick at 3:47 p.m. He attempted to follow Major Schnell's advice. He attempted to disengage. But P-47 pilot First Lieutenant James Morrison from Athens, Georgia, achieved firing solution in 1.8 seconds. Morrison fired a 3-second burst. 97 rounds. Schmidt's Bf-109K4 broke apart at 14,000 feet. Schmidt was 20 years old. He had 47 hours total flight time. Morrison had 284 combat hours and had destroyed 11 enemy aircraft. The engagement was not combat. It was industrial capacity destroying undertrained opposition. Morrison filed his combat report that evening. He noted that the German pilot made multiple tactical errors, failed to maintain speed, failed to use clouds for cover, failed to execute proper evasive maneuvers. Morrison's assessment was correct, but it missed the larger truth. Peter Schmidt failed because Germany could no longer provide the training, the fuel, the ammunition, or the time to create expert pilots. Schmidt received 47 hours of flight training. Morrison received 340 hours of training before his first combat mission. Schmidt fired 380 practice rounds during training. Morrison fired 11,200 practice rounds. The industrial gap was not just in the aircraft. It was in every aspect of preparing pilots for combat. Remember Captain Robert Hughes from the opening of this story. The pilot who turned Klaus Weber's Bf-109 into riddled with holes on May 14, 1943, Hughes survived the war. He returned to Farmington, New Mexico in September 1945. He became a crop duster. He flew for 43 more years. He died in 1991 at age 74. Before he died, he gave an interview to the Farmington Daily Times. The reporter asked him what he remembered most about the war. Hughes' answer appears in the archived newspaper. Quote, "I remember the ammunition. I know that sounds strange, but I remember how the ammunition never failed. I fired thousands of rounds in combat. I never had a single malfunction. Not one. My guns worked every single time I pulled the trigger." I learned later that German pilots could not say the same thing. Their guns jammed, their ammunition misfired, and that 3% failure rate killed them. I survived because a factory worker in Missouri checked every single round I fired. I survived because someone I never met cared about quality control. That is what won the war. Anonymous people doing unglamorous work perfectly. That factory worker Captain Hughes never met was probably someone like Dorothy Miller. Dorothy worked at Lake City Army Ammunition Plant from May 1942 to August 1945. She inspected 50 caliber ammunition on the graveyard shift, midnight to 8 a.m. She checked 12,000 rounds per shift. She rejected any round showing any defect, no matter how minor. In 3 years of work, she rejected full 847 rounds. That is a rejection rate of 0.039%, less than 4 rounds per 10,000. Dorothy Miller never flew in combat, never fired a gun at an enemy, never left Missouri during the war, but she saved lives because every round she approved worked. Every round she rejected prevented a weapon malfunction, a malfunction that could have killed an American pilot. Dorothy Miller passed away in 2003 at the age of 82. Her obituary in the Kansas City Star mentioned her war work in a single sentence. But that one sentence represents the truth about how America won the air war. Not with better pilots necessarily. Not with better tactics, although they helped, but with better ammunition, manufactured by better quality control, performed by anonymous workers who took pride in perfection. The P-47's 8 guns were devastating because they worked. They worked because the ammunition worked. The ammunition worked because people like Dorothy Miller made sure it worked. The cold, hard mathematical reality of quality control explains the Luftwaffe's collapse. A 3% ammunition failure rate sounds insignificant. 3 defective rounds per 100, but consider the implications in combat. A P-47 pilot carrying 3,400 rounds with a 0.04% failure rate would experience approximately 1 malfunction per combat mission. 1 round out of 3,400. That single malfunction would not affect combat capability. The pilot had 399 functional rounds remaining. A German pilot carrying 850 rounds with a 3% failure rate would experience 25 malfunctions per mission, 25 rounds out of 850. Each malfunction risked a weapon jam. Each weapon jam required clearing procedures that took precious seconds that could mean death in combat. By 1944, German pilot training manuals included detailed procedures for clearing weapon jams in combat. American training manuals did not. American pilots were not trained to clear jams because jams were so rare that training for them was considered utterly unnecessary. That difference reveals the industrial abyss more clearly than production numbers alone. Germany assumed weapons would fail and trained pilots accordingly. America built weapons that did not fail and trained pilots to exploit unrelenting, reliable firepower. The convergence of all these factors, ammunition quality, weapon reliability, pilot training, and an overwhelming volume of fire, created a psychological effect on Luftwaffe pilots that no German propaganda could counter. By early 1945, German pilots were more afraid of P-47s than they were motivated to defend Germany. That's not cowardice. That is a rational response to impossible odds. When you know that engaging the enemy gives you a 92% chance of death, engagement becomes suicide, and the Luftwaffe, for all its faults, was not asking pilots to commit suicide. It was asking them to defend Germany. But you cannot defend Germany if you are dead. The final months of the war saw German fighters actively avoiding combat with P-47 formations. Allied bomber crews reported German fighters breaking off attacks the moment P-47 escorts arrived. Radio intercepts recorded German pilots warning each other, "Thunderbolts present, disengage." The psychological dominance was complete. 8 50 caliber guns had achieved what strategic bombing could not. They had broken the Luftwaffe's will to fight. Klaus Weber, who counted 47 holes in his Bf 109 on May 14, 1943, lived until 1998. He was 81 years old when he passed. His grandson, also named Klaus, asked him once why he never flew again after the war. The elder Klaus gave an answer that appears in the family history. His grandson published in 2004. Quote, "Every time I saw an airplane, I heard those 8 guns. Every time I heard a loud noise, I was back at 11,000 feet. Watching my wingman disintegrate, I could not fly again, because flying reminded me that I survived and Hans did not. I survived because the American pilot ran out of target before he ran out of ammunition. Hans died because the American pilot had 3,400 rounds and perfect trigger discipline. That is not luck. That is industrial superiority. And I could not face that reality from a cockpit ever again." That testimony from a German veteran 63 years after his last combat mission reveals the enduring psychological impact of P-47 firepower. Klaus Weber did not develop trauma from being shot down. He developed trauma from being shot and surviving. From counting 47 holes and realizing that every single hole represented American industrial capacity. Every hole was a round that was manufactured correctly, loaded correctly, fired correctly, and performed as designed. 47 rounds out of 127 fired hit his aircraft. The other 80 rounds hit his wingman, or missed entirely. But all 127 rounds worked. Not one malfunction, not one misfire. That level of reliability was what broke Klaus Weber. Not just the combat, the realization that America had built a system he could not beat. Your freedom was built by people like Dorothy Miller, inspecting ammunition at midnight in Missouri, by pilots like Robert Hughes, firing 14 200 practice rounds until muscle memory replaced thought, by engineers who designed guns to fire 100,000 rounds without failure, by a system that valued reliability over finesse, overwhelming force over tactical elegance, and quality control over cost savings. That system turned 8 50 caliber guns into a weapon that made the Luftwaffe issue orders, protecting student pilots from combat. That made German veterans count holes for the rest of their lives. That made "riddled with holes" a metaphor for German fighters after encountering American firepower. Team P-47 Thunderbolt or Team P-51 Mustang? Which fighter do you think had the greatest impact on winning air superiority over Europe? Drop your choice in the comments and tell me why. The debate between Thunderbolt firepower and Mustang range has divided aviation historians for 80 years. Your perspective matters. Your freedom flies on wings of overwhelming firepower, delivered by pilots trained to expert level, supplied by factories that never compromised quality for quantity. This is the generation that saved the world, 8 50 caliber guns at a time.